Attention, the content of this recording is top secret. Possession of this record without proper authorization is a Class 1 felony, and, if you are discovered, you will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. You have been warned.
Archivist notes. A department-wide memo came down from Director Hopkins. It reads, "The Department of Homeland Security has given funding for the digitization of our research archive to enable us to better collate and find trends in the data contained therein. Going forward, all documents are to be stored in PDF and audio format. Funding has been obtained to improve our digital storage infrastructure to support this order." Can't really argue with it, but many staff find it perplexing that the Arcane Research Commission would receive technological funding due to the incident that led to the termination of Project Paladin a few years ago. And yet here we are. I wonder if the investigations department's going to look into this any further, but given how strapped for funding the commission has been of late, I highly doubt it. Anyway, they told me to record and transcribe anything they put on my desk, and here's the first one. This is probably one of the most infamous documents in the records. We've never been able to identify the field agent who wrote it. I suppose it's as good a place to start as any. Document ID TWG.0001. Subject: The Wellness Group, LLC. Primary witness: Mr. Malcolm Burton, age 40. Witness status: missing. Likely deceased. Recording agent: unknown. Damage to the document has obscured what was previously written. The unofficial designation for this around the office is Mr. Burton's perfectly normal day. Let's begin. Mr. Malcolm Burton woke up at 6 a.m., as he did every morning, to the blaring of the same alarm clock he'd been using for the past 20 years. He groaned as he reached over to shut the damned thing off. He hated that sound every morning, but it was the only thing that had ever managed to rouse him. He sat up and leaned over to kiss his wife before he got ready for work. He then remembered that he'd never married, and yet here he was, in a 3-bedroom townhouse with a California king-size bed. He couldn't help but question why he had it. Burton didn't feel any preference for a spacious bed, and from the soreness he felt, the mattress wasn't doing his back any favors. He can't really recall having any sort of romantic inclinations altogether. Yet here he was, a middle-aged man, living alone, with a bed that took up nearly half the floor space in his bedroom. He would have continued wondering about this, had he not realized he'd be late for work if he didn't get going. It was already 6:10 a.m., and he hadn't even taken a shower yet. At 6:15, Malcolm Burton went through his normal morning routine. He took a shower. The water pressure was low today, but at least the hot water was working. "Must be a problem with the pipes again," he muttered, to no one in particular. Mr. Burton was unsure exactly why, but he had found himself doing that quite a lot lately, speaking as though there was someone in his home who could hear him. This wouldn't have struck him as unusual if it weren't for the fact that he'd never been known to do it until maybe a couple of months ago. He shrugged it off and brushed his teeth, while continuing to consider his current state of mind, until something about his reflection struck him as odd. Mr. Malcolm Burton was in his 40s, sure, but his reflection had the bearing of someone far older. When had his hair gotten so gray? The lines under his eyes were many and deep. Mr. Burton's skin also looked incredibly pale, as though he hadn't seen the sun in months. Though Malcolm knew exactly why he had that particular issue. His workplace in the morgue for St. Montesquieu Hospital didn't exactly have a lot of natural light, and it was well past sunset when he usually went home for the day. Had Mr. Burton not known his own age, he could have easily mistaken himself for someone in their 60s, maybe older. Perhaps I should take a vacation, he thought. I can't remember the last time I'd taken some time off. Though, he knew in his heart he probably wouldn't be taking it anytime soon. He'd long been in a routine, and breaking it was only going to throw him off. At 6:45 a.m., Malcolm Burton made himself a light breakfast of some buttered whole grain toast and a glass of milk. He rarely had much of an appetite for much else in the morning these days. While he ate, Mr. Burton couldn't help but get the impression that, at some vague point in time, 2 school-aged children would be groggily eating breakfast with him at this time. He wasn't sure why, though. He'd never had any romantic partner, so why then would he imagine himself having children? Mr. Burton left his half-eaten toast on the plate. He'd lost his appetite. At 6:50 a.m., Malcolm Burton couldn't help but look at the other rooms of his home. He wasn't sure why. When he opened them, there was nothing there. And by nothing there, it is meant that there was nothing in them. No furniture, no decorations, just bare and empty rooms and closets. Again, Mr. Burton's mind can't help but question the reality of his living situation. Why did he even need these rooms? He's lived in this house for years, and yet he hadn't done anything with these rooms. He wasn't using them as guest rooms, nor as an office. Hell, he wasn't even using them to store boxes of things he'd acquired over the years and refused to sort through. Just carpet and slightly faded paint. He might have questioned why he'd lived in such a large house more if he hadn't decided to leave for work at that time. At 7:20 a.m., Malcolm Burton just barely made it to his subway line before it left the station. He was out of breath and wheezing as he took his seat, and felt the train lurch forward, making its way towards his destination roughly 5 stops away. He was lucky to live in the same city he worked in. Unfortunately, said city was large enough that the subway was the only way Mr. Burton could possibly make it to work on time. If he tried to drive himself or take a taxi, he'd need at least an extra 2 hours of commute time, meaning he'd need to get up even earlier. And he didn't even get much sleep as it is. He often spent his nights reading and losing track of time. The bookshelf and the television were all that was in his living room, but somewhere in his mind there were images of a much less empty home that he could almost swear was real. This line of thought was interrupted by a headache. It was a splitting pain, right at the top of his head and behind his eyes. Thankfully, it only lasted for a moment. At 7:35, Mr. Burton's train stopped at the Steinhauer Road station. Mr. Burton got off the subway and out onto the street. He only needed to walk a few blocks to work from there. The way his mind had been going today, Mr. Burton perhaps considered taking some time off after all. He'd been putting in a lot of extra time at the hospital lately. He'd even put in extra shifts on holidays and weekends. Why was he putting in so much extra time at work? True, it wasn't like he had much going on at home, but why did it seem so necessary to work extra hard? Oh yes, Wendy was expecting a baby. Wait, who's Wendy? The name seemed so familiar, and yet Mr. Burton couldn't place it. And yet it felt incredibly important to him. He decided to start walking before he got another headache. At 7:45 a.m., Malcolm Burton was trying to assess his own mental state as he made his way toward the hospital. Why was he getting these errant thoughts? It's like his mind was conjuring up an alternate life he might have lived had he made different choices. But then again, an active imagination wasn't normally coupled together with severe headaches when it's used. Perhaps all the stress he'd been having at work lately was getting to him. As he reached the edge of the hospital's parking lot, Mr. Burton decided that maybe, just maybe, he should see his psychiatrist. He was about due for his monthly visit anyway. Maybe she could offer some advice to help him out. At 7:50 a.m., Mr. Burton sent a message to her office. She agreed to see him that evening when he was done with work for the day. At 7:55 a.m., Mr. Burton had clocked in for the day and was beginning to prep for the day's work. He hoped that having something to do would distract him from an uncanny feeling that something terrible was happening, or, worse yet, already had. At 8 a.m., Mr. Burton was at his workstation and feeling very shaky. He hadn't been able to get very much done. He'd been relying on his assistant to take over most of his normal duties. His mind was all over the place. He was very sweaty. His heart was pounding in his chest. He was having trouble catching his breath. If he didn't know better, Mr. Burton would have thought he was having a heart attack. The lack of pain in his chest, shoulders, or arms was the only indicator he didn't need to head to the emergency room immediately. At 10 a.m., Malcolm Burton felt calm enough to resume his work responsibilities. The morgue wasn't all that busy. Oftentimes, Mr. Burton would go about his job with a degree of humor, the sort of humor which one gains from years of working around corpses. Mr. Burton didn't feel like he was in the mood to make jokes today. He was able to keep his hands steady enough for work. The morgue was shockingly empty. No bodies had come in all morning, and most of his work involved handing corpses over to various funeral homes that had been arranged by the friends or relatives of the deceased. At 12 o'clock p.m., Mr. Burton was eating his lunch. His lunch was a lukewarm pizza from the hospital's cafeteria. Even here, the sudden flashes of false memory seemed to be unable to leave him be. He was having a memory of a meatloaf sandwich, lovingly prepared by a wife which he knew he never had, with "I love you" written on the napkin. His coworkers asked him if something had happened at home. Mr. Burton found himself unable to answer. His coworkers were looking at him with concern, and just beneath that concern he could see pity, perhaps? He didn't know why they were looking at him with pity. He finished his lunch and spent the rest of his break at his desk, trying his best to gather himself to finish the day. At 1 o'clock p.m., Mr. Burton tried desperately to keep himself together. He only had to suffer through 4 more hours before he could meet with his psychiatrist. Then, hopefully, he can resume his life as normal. No more false memories plaguing him and making him question his own sanity. He kept his hands steady, tried his best to keep his mind on his work, to avoid letting these errant thoughts plague his mind. At 3 o'clock p.m., a corpse was brought in from intensive care. The name on her chart read Wendy Burton. She had been pregnant and had been brought in last night in critical condition. Both she and her unborn child had been declared dead early this morning. For some reason, that fact hit Mr. Malcolm Burton very hard. His assistant wouldn't let him near the body to work on it, insisting she'd handle it. He didn't argue. He only wept quietly at his desk for reasons he didn't quite understand. Was this woman a relative of his? Surely not. He didn't have any living relatives that he knew of. Yet here he was, his mind completely taken over with grief. Sorrow for someone he didn't know. Why? Why did he feel as though he had just lost one of the people who had been closest to him? At 4 o'clock p.m., the hospital administrator took him aside and told him he should leave early today. He's very clearly not in an emotional state where he can work. Forms were presented to him regarding paid bereavement leave. Mr. Burton didn't object when filling them out. Mr. Burton was given 2 weeks to mourn some sort of loss that he didn't seem to fully comprehend. All he knew at this point was that he had suffered some sort of great loss. But he didn't know what. He decided to walk to his psychiatrist's office. Maybe it allowed him to take some time to compose his thoughts before going in. Thankfully, her clinic was only 30 minutes away on foot. At 5 o'clock p.m., Mr. Burton entered the clinic his psychiatrist worked in. The bright green and white sign read, "The Wellness Place." Mr. Burton was never sure why, but he never felt entirely at peace while at this place. But it was the only mental health clinic nearby that took the hospital's health insurance. And so it was the only place Mr. Burton could afford to go. Mr. Burton had managed to compose himself somewhat during his walk, but for some reason, more false memories were beginning to scratch at the back of his mind. These thoughts spun a tale of him coming in here before, with a pregnant woman 2 days ago, that he seemed to recall being his wife. It distressed Mr. Burton that the people he'd been seeing in his visions were seemingly developing more concrete identities in his mind, but he knew this Wendy wasn't real. It was just his mind playing tricks on him. At 5:05 p.m., Mr. Burton checked in at the counter. The receptionist was a very thin woman in scrubs, whose name tag read Bonnie. Mr. Burton signed the paperwork and took his seat. He could have sworn there was something sinister in the way Bonnie seemed to look at him, as he turned to take a seat in the waiting area. If he hadn't known better, it almost seemed hungry, like how a coiled viper would look at a cornered mouse. Mr. Burton thought better of it, but as he began leafing through a very old edition of Motor Trend, he became acutely aware of how he was currently the only person in the waiting area, and he swore he could feel Bonnie's eyes boring into him from the reception desk. But anytime he looked towards the reception counter, she seemed to be handling some sort of task at her terminal. A sense of dread made Mr. Burton feel as though the bottom of his stomach had dropped out. He felt every single one of the 25 minutes it took for a psychiatrist to call him back. At 5:30 p.m., Malcolm Burton's psychiatrist opened the door to the back area of the clinic and called Mr. Burton's name. Mr. Burton always thought of Dr. Lyra Dolos as a fairly unassuming woman. Were it not for Mr. Burton's already distressed state, he might not have noticed her call him. Come to think of it, normally Mr. Burton didn't tend to notice Dr. Dolos calling him to the back of the clinic until she had walked all the way up to him and literally forced his book down, which usually startled him. Wait, what did Mr. Burton usually read? He couldn't remember being fond of any particular genre of literature. Dr. Dolos was guiding him by the hand into her office. Her facial expression spoke of concern, but it didn't quite seem to reach her eyes, which almost seemed as though they were sizing him up. Had Dr. Dolos' eyes always been acid green? They had reached the office before Mr. Burton could ponder this any further. At 5:32 p.m., Dr. Lyra Dolos instructed Mr. Burton to sit on the couch opposite her chair. It took Mr. Burton a full minute to take his seat. For some reason, Dr. Dolos' presence only seemed to heighten the dread he'd been feeling earlier. There was something about this place that made him uneasy. Maybe it was the oddly high ceiling. Maybe the room seemed a bit too small. Either way, Mr. Burton's every instinct seemed to be telling him to get as far away from Dr. Dolos as possible, and yet his body refused to move. Dr. Dolos seemed to sense Mr. Burton's fears. She spoke. Her voice was professional and dispassionate. She instructed Mr. Burton to look into her eyes. Mr. Burton looked into Dr. Dolos' eyes, and he felt calm. No, he didn't. His body felt just as tense as it had moments ago, but for some reason, he felt disconnected from his body, as though his mind was no longer influencing what his body did. Something was very, very wrong. His mind felt fuzzy. Dr. Dolos spoke again. The hairs on the back of Mr. Burton's neck stood on end. There was something in her voice. He couldn't quite put his finger on why. It seemed oddly echoey. somehow deeper than earlier. At 5:37 p.m., Dr. Dolos asked Malcolm Burton what had caused him to set a same-day appointment. The back of Mr. Burton's mind was screaming at him not to tell Dr. Dolos anything, to keep silent, to run. This isn't safe. But Mr. Burton could not do anything to stop himself from telling Dr. Dolos everything. There was something that was controlling him. Not just in body, it felt like a worm had burrowed into his very consciousness, subverting his will, forcing him to relive the painful visions and speak them to Dr. Dolos. As Malcolm Burton spoke these visions, starting with him autonomously rolling over to kiss a non-existent wife, the corners of Dr. Dolos's mouth began to turn upwards, a very slight smile, but there was no warmth behind it. They only crept upwards as he spoke about the kids he saw eating breakfast with him. Dr. Dolos's lips parted, showing oddly sharp teeth as her smile continued to climb. Were her eyes glowing? Mr. Burton had just recounted his questioning why he owned such a large home when he lived alone and had little furniture. Was Dr. Dolos's neck always that long? Mr. Burton told her about the non-existent hobbies he imagined having. The doctor's teeth looked like needles. There's multiple rows. Mr. Burton talked of the overtime he had no reason to take. The doctor's head's on a neck coiling in on itself. The body of Wendy, his wife at the morgue. All at once, something clicked in Mr. Burton's mind. A moment of clarity and calm. At 5:50 p.m., Mr. Burton realized these visions weren't false. His wife went missing yesterday. His children had been gone for a week. Just as he came to this realization, a much more serpentine Dr. Dolos sank her fangs into his skull, and all was black. Mr. Malcolm Burton woke up at 6 a.m., as he did every morning, to the blaring of the same alarm clock he'd been using for the past 20 years. He groaned as he reached over to shut the damned thing off. He hated that sound every morning, but it was the only thing that had ever managed to rouse him. He questioned why he got up so early still. He hadn't been able to find steady work since he dropped out of university. He seemed to recall working in a mortuary-related profession at some point, but he doesn't know why he'd choose such a grim profession. He remembered his psychiatrist, Dr. Lyra Dolos, would be making a house call today. He hoped she'd be able to help him turn his life around. So, a little bit of follow-up's been done about Mr. Malcolm Burton. The dates on the report match with St. Monsque Hospital's record of Mr. Burton being put on bereavement leave on the same date as this report, after his wife, Mrs. Wendy Burton, was brought into the morgue. Mr. Burton's disappearance was not noticed until he did not return to work after the scheduled end of his leave. After 3 days, authorities were contacted and found Mr. Burton's home to be stripped bare, save for a few scant items of furniture, a bed, a chair, some rotting food in the pantry and fridge. They found a bloodstain near the door, and testing indicated it was Mr. Burton's. However, the investigation hit a dead end, as there was no evidence of who or what took Mr. Burton from his home. His children also were never found. The record by itself put the Wellness Group LLC on our radar. Turns out it was an organization that was doing something with people's memories, wiping them, but leaving traces so that clients kept returning and giving them money. The full truth turned out to be something far worse. Glad we actually managed to shutter them for good. This record's oddity stems from its viewpoint. It's written as though the observer had intimate knowledge of not only Mr. Burton's actions, but his internal thoughts, leading up to a seeming speculation about the date of his abduction and possible death. Most of this information a field agent would have no knowledge of, unless he was told these things by Mr. Burton himself. The theory around the office is that the agent who wrote this decided to use his report as the opportunity to test his skills as an author. It leaves something to be desired. It's an interesting start to this whole digitization initiative in any case. Oh, I should probably stop recording.